Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music both new and old, and today I'm talking about the new album from Comaduster, Solace. Comaduster is the alias for one Real Cardinal, or however you say that. Some people may remember I reviewed his Hollow Worlds album a while back, though I had a much smaller audience at the time. You can check that review out, link in the description, though I will say I enjoyed the hell out of it. It was such an interesting and diverse mishmash of styles and sounds that all worked well together and sounded amazing, from industrial and metal to ambient and IDM and drum and bass, you name it. So much that went into it sonically, and I had to give it a particularly high recommendation, even though it didn't play to my personal taste much until maybe like track 4 or so. So yeah, needless to say, I'm a fan of this guy. The one question did kind of linger for me after finishing Hollow Worlds. Where do you go from here? The guy had already explored his sound in so many ways that were super interesting just on that one album. I had no idea where he would take it next, if he would take it anywhere at all. I do remember I heard a single from this album at the beginning of last year, Emergent 1. I only heard it once, and it was over a year and a half ago, so it's, it was subject to change, but I was initially disappointed by the single, as it didn't seem like a new direction for Comaduster. It just seemed like he was rehashing sounds already explored on Hollow Worlds. And that unfortunately put a major damper on my excitement for this follow-up album, which, already by the length, didn't appear to be quite as large as in scale. I was a little put off by the fact that he packaged the album on Bandcamp with this massive PDF that outlines its science fiction concept in such a ridiculous amount of detail that it made my brain hurt. I mean, kudos to the guy for putting that much effort into this concept. Jesus Christ, I've never seen an album that requires something like that. That being said, it did make me wonder if it was really necessary. If it really was required to get the full enjoyment out of the album, I don't know if I could give it the full thumbs up. If you don't have the music to support it, then what's the point of having this insane concept that requires so much reading time? Yeah, so I was definitely skeptical going into Solace, but I also kept in mind how skeptical I was going into Hollow Worlds as well, after misunderstanding one of the tags, and that still impressed me. So, how does Solace fare? Holy fucking Christ, where to begin? Okay, so how about I just start out with my major criticisms right off the bat? My biggest fear for this album was confirmed. Sonically, this isn't a particularly far cry from Hollow Worlds. This new album did not really show him doing any further sonic experimentation or really try anything that didn't seem particularly out of his comfort zone. And as far as criticisms go, that's about it. This album may not sound that different from Hollow Worlds, but much to my surprise, what Solace ended up doing was make Hollow Worlds look not as good in comparison. Mind you, I still think Hollow Worlds is a fantastic album, but it does still have problems. Namely, that it has a couple of tracks that can be kind of tough for me to personally get through nowadays, like The Send-Off, or Future-Proof Design, which was one of my favorites previously, but not so much anymore, to be honest. And it also had, like, a lot of atonal industrial breakdowns that, while really cool, if I'm in the right mood for it, can be kind of patience testing if I'm not. If it weren't for the presence of the track Unfound giving my brain a break from all the intensity the album throws at me, it would feel overly long and tiring despite the insane amount of detail I do still have to give it credit for. And I still maintain the album doesn't start to really get good for me until the title track, though the track Winter Eyes is a bit of a grower too. But never mind that, I've already reviewed that album and I still recommend it. Point is, Solace fixes a lot of my issues with Hollow Worlds. Though this album as well is stronger in the back end than it is in the front end, the album's shorter length allows for a more concise and less tiring experience. Each individual track still maintains its enjoyability, and the whole thing feels like it stuffs roughly the same amount of content, if not more content, over a shorter amount of time. I don't know if it completely invalidates listening to Hollow Worlds. That album felt more like him developing his sound and showing off how far he could take it. This one is just overall better structured and assembled as a full album experience. So, let's go into individual tracks. There's a lot to cover here, despite there only being 8. Every track on here is meant to sound really expansive and epic in order to match its science fiction concept. I'll discuss the lyrics in a bit, but I'll focus on production and sound first since that's my general expertise. So the first 3 tracks on here are all kind of similar, kind of these over-the-top rock-influenced tunes with interesting rhythms and IDM influences too, and as I said, really intense and epic production meant to make it sound really huge and expansive. So out of these 3, the first one, the Retracer, is probably my personal favorite. I kind of like its bouncier beat, and it just gets a little catchier every time I hear it. The guy's voice especially sounds like Rob Swire on this track, which has admittedly always been the case, but yeah, not a complaint by the way. I'm still very much a Pendulum fan, so this is yet another upside for me that also adds to the album's accessibility. And that single that I was initially disappointed by, Emergent 1, also a big grower. While that was my least favorite initially, it has definitely grown on me, and it's one of the tracks that's easier to sing along to, especially that Emerge as One part. Even if that one F-bomb does, admittedly, always kind of catch me off guard. It doesn't feel unwarranted, mind you, but it just kind of throws me off for a second, since it's the only curse word on the whole album. But whatever, I'm rambling. The Entangled is a little forgettable compared to the 2 tracks adjacent to it, but still not a remotely skippable track either. Still perfectly enjoyable and awesome production, and it's a bit more abstract than those other 2. These first 3 tracks are probably the weakest tracks on here, purely by merit of being more simplistic, not having as much to talk about. They wowed me the least, but that's still not saying much, as they wowed me like everything else on this album. I feel like also these first 3 tracks kind of sort of flow together as like a kind of mini-suite of sorts. And by the way, I should mention, this album is a continuous mix, and a really well put together one at that. These tracks all flow together perfectly. And anyway, going from there, Selfsimilar is the point at which this album really started to get amazing for me. It's a more up-tempo track with some really awesome electric bass guitar lines in some parts, and one section that's particularly catchy. This is the time if you wanted to, this is the time if you wanted to break away. I think it's one of the poppier sounding tracks too, especially in that one particular section, though it does still have a pretty non-linear structure and some pretty cool industrial breakdowns as well. The industrial breakdowns on this album, by the way, never feel like they overstay their welcome, which, as I said, was an upside for me given how that was one of my nitpicks with Hollow Worlds. Ancient Generations is this album's equivalent to Unfound. It's a primarily ambient track that serves as a break from the chaos of the rest of the album. You know, a moment of solace within solace. I'm clever. But unlike Unfound, it doesn't break away from the sound of the rest of the album or sound remotely out of place. I'm not sure which track I like more, to be honest. I mean, I am always a sucker for a good piano track, but I think this one's better placed within the context of the album. Both tracks are awesome, though. Then that takes us to the title track, Solace. And this is kind of this album's equivalent to Night Sail from Hollow Worlds, in that it's the longest track and it just goes all over the place. Lots of different sections and sounds, like it could almost be like 3 different tracks or something. It's got louder moments, it's got more accessible sounding moments, or more ambient sounding moments, but it's also got louder and more abstract moments. And it all comes together pretty well, all things considering. Well, there is admittedly one moment, about 6 minutes into this track, where it feels like we've switched over to a different track entirely, like the key changes, and it sounds noticeably different. Like switching over to this sort of acid house influence screwing around. But, you know, I don't mind that. Makes things more interesting, and I do always enjoy that sort of acid house influence. And it also kind of makes sense coming right after this really loud and abstract section that I think is supposed to symbolize the collapse of a universe or something. Yeah, that kind of thing happens in this album more than once. But after this is where the album starts to get dark. Yeah, after a track that has something symbolizing an end of the universe on an album that already sounded pretty dark. But, I mean, Solace doesn't really sound that dark, aside from that one part, at least compared to the rest of the album. The Shadowsphere, though, is significantly more menacing. It's a lot noisier and louder. I'm getting some really noticeable metal influences and maybe some prog rock elements out of this too. And then that of course leaves the ending, the Voidless, which is a jaw-droppingly climactic way to close things out. Quite literally going out with a bang. Like seriously, there's one part 3 minutes in that's just a blast of noise and screaming, preceded by some particularly heavy and dramatic atmospherics. I guess all symbolizing restarting over the universe. It's just insane. And at the end, the album loops. I'm serious, this album is specifically engineered so that you can play it on repeat and it forms a perfectly seamless loop. That is pretty awesome, I have to say. And we've barely touched upon the lyrics here. Okay. As far as the science fiction story goes, I can't even begin to describe it. It's got universes starting and ending, metaphysical beings being split into two, space wars. It's also insanely complicated and not even told in chronological order. The PDF included with the Bandcamp release explains everything better than I ever could, including a 3-page glossary that explains all the various concepts and ideas and terms. I was worried that the story would be far too overblown and not have the music to back it up, but as I've mentioned already, the music is more than fitting for the insane story that it tells. Granted, the science fiction story does still mostly go over my head, but the PDF at least makes it possible to wrap my head around. But if you're one of those people who believes an album shouldn't need supplemental material for full enjoyment, I am at least happy to say the lyrics of this album have a much more down-to-earth and less pretentious alternate theme, that of mental illness. Stuff like dissociation and personality disorders, I guess symbolized by the above-mentioned metaphysical being split into two, and also losing one of its halves. There's themes of depression as well. There's lots of talk of the void and being ruled by the void and that kind of stuff. The Bandcamp description also mentions ADHD. That I didn't pick up on, to be honest. And speaking as someone, I have ADD myself. I don't know. Maybe that's why the story is told out of order or something. Hard to tell, really. But to finish off this review, as you can tell by the length of this video, the main thing I have to take away from Solace is just the insane amount of detail that went into this thing. It's clear that the long wait in between albums was, utilized well. He mentions in the Bandcamp descriptions how the main thing that pushed this album back was mastering, and let me just say, as someone who kind of knows the basics of mastering, a well-mastered album is actually ridiculously difficult to pull off, and the kind of thing that not many people have the talent for. Especially when it comes to an album like this, that needs to sound really spacey and has so many elements that need their own room in the mix. And his mastering on this album is pitch perfect. I'm very glad he pushed it farther back in order to perfect it, because I think he did in fact pull it off to the highest degree he could. He also has an instrumental version of this album, which he mentioned needed a completely separate mix, because yes, mastering is in fact that complicated, unfortunately. Now, I listened to the instrumental versions of this album as well, and personally I prefer the vocal versions. I think the instrumental versions do kind of feel a bit empty without Comaduster's voice, but it could just be that I've listened to the standard vocal version a lot more and that I'm used to it all being there, but, the instrumentals are enjoyable in their own right. There's just not a single element in this album that feels out of place or unwarranted or that Comaduster didn't put his all into. Every sound works, and despite the intense nature of the album, it never feels overbearing. And while again, it might not be fully fine-tuned to my personal tastes, it's more so than Hollow Worlds, being much spacier and even catchier as well. A lot of these tracks are surprisingly really fun to sing along to, and a significant step up from Hollow Worlds in that department as well. I don't think it's worthy of a 10 for me, but I can easily imagine it being so for someone who is more into these specific styles. It does, of course, again, make me wonder where Comaduster could possibly go from here. How could he top this now? And I do kind of hope that his next album will focus on different sounds, but we'll see. All I can say, now, this album is a serious contender for Album of the Year. You need to check it out and support this guy who clearly put years of effort and has insane talent and attention to detail. It's almost hard to believe an album of this scale even exists, but I'm very glad for every second I spent with this thing. Go check it out seriously, and I'm overall feeling a solid 9 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.